70 years ago, a single nuclear weapon destroyed an entire city, Hiroshima in Japan. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed instantly, and those who weren't killed were left running through the streets with their flesh burning off of their bodies, screaming for three things: their mothers, help, and water. Now, some people think we need nuclear weapons as a deterrent, but a nuclear weapon is a suicide bomb for the entire planet. And the bomb that was used to destroy Hiroshima is a baby compared to today's standards. And does deterrence work? Well, the answer is yes, if you're 100% certain that they won't be used. And in this volatile era, how certain are you?
Nuclear weapons are the gravest threat to human survival in the world today, and it has to be our highest priority to eliminate these weapons completely. As long as they exist, there is some risk they're going to be used. And with enough passage of time, they will be used. And when they are used, they're going to destroy everything that we hold precious in the world. What's become even more dangerous in the last few years, relations between the United States and Russia have deteriorated to a point that we did not expect ever to see again when the Cold War ended. Relationships between the United States and China are in very bad shape, and there are potential military flashpoints now in the South China Sea. The rivalry between India and Pakistan in South Asia continues, and there is a vigorous nuclear arms race there, with both countries rapidly expanding their nuclear arsenals and evolving doctrines of first use of nuclear weapons, which are profoundly destabilizing. And finally, there is the situation in North Korea, which clearly is hard to predict. We don't know what's going to happen there, but it's a very dangerous situation. Those are the geographic flashpoints.
What then could go wrong with the idea of nuclear deterrence, which is that you have a weapon that's so powerful that no one would actually want to use it?
Deterrence has always been a very fragile reed to base the security of the world on, even though our leaders supposedly knew how terrible nuclear war would be and therefore would never wage it. We've come within minutes on many, many occasions during the Cold War and even after the Cold War, within minutes of fighting a nuclear war which would have destroyed humanity. So it's always been, I think, a flawed doctrine. But today it's even more of a problem because we don't just have two nuclear powers that could engage in nuclear war. There are many countries that have these weapons. The relationships between them are very unstable. And we have a problem in some places with the current leadership. Deterrence has always assumed that the decision makers in the nuclear weapon states would be rational, stable people who could be counted on to make wise decisions. Many of us have argued that no human is wise enough to be trusted with this power, but it's become even more of a question with the election of Donald Trump in the United States. Here's a man whose own party has judged him to be unqualified to command nuclear weapons by temperament, by knowledge. He is an impulsive, vindictive man who doesn't attend to security briefings. And he's in charge of 6,800 nuclear weapons. This is a profoundly dangerous situation.
Can you explain to me what actually happens when a leader decides to use nuclear weapons? Because there has to be a period of fear that an attack might be made on a particular country. So whether it's the United States, whether it's North Korea, whether it's any other of the nuclear powers, the leader is presented with a set of circumstances. What happens then?
Well, here in the United States, we do not have a no first use policy, so it does not require that the United States believe it be under nuclear attack in order for the President of the United States to order the launch of nuclear weapons. And the way things are set up in the United States, the President has the absolute authority to launch nuclear weapons. It is his decision. He does not have to go to Congress even to get authorization to do this. He can make the determination himself that he wants to use nuclear weapons, and he gives an order. And it is a lawful order under current U.S. law. And the chain of command is supposed to carry out that order and launch the weapons. And it takes about 15 minutes once the president has decided for nuclear weapons all around the world to be launched.
What are the triggers that will make the president or the leader of any other country think it's time to consider nuclear weapons?
Well, I think in the current situation, the greatest danger is that we'll stumble into a nuclear conflict, much as the nations of Europe stumbled into World War I 100 years ago. There are all of these potential flashpoints, And the nature of things is that conflict tends to escalate. So, for example, if the United States and North Korea get into a bluffing game, and which they already are in to some degree, and one of them makes a move which the other finds to be unacceptably provocative and ups the ante, you could imagine leaders who are not particularly well versed in these issues making bad decisions and deciding it's time to use the nuclear option on either side of this divide, North Korea, the US.
We've been hearing a lot about cyber attacks and the influence of hacking computers on political events. How does this come into the nuclear situation?
Well, for many years we thought that the worst form of nuclear terrorism would be if a terrorist got a bomb and blew it up in London or New York or Moscow. But it turns out that there's a far greater terrorist danger, which is that terrorists could conduct a cyber attack and either launch nuclear weapons or, perhaps more likely, create a false warning where a nuclear power thought that it was already under attack by the other side. This has happened not as a result of terrorist attacks, but of simple computer failures on multiple occasions during the Cold War. At least 5 times, either Moscow or the US thought, because of computer mistakes, that the other side had already launched nuclear war and prepared to launch war itself. And terrorists could create the same kind of problem by infiltrating a computer network and creating the appearance that an attack is already underway.
And yet nuclear weapons are so very attractive politically to a number of countries. What do you think can be done to dislodge this joy that countries seem to have about having nuclear weapons?
I think what we need to do is educate decision makers and the public about the real danger that nuclear weapons pose. People tend to think of nuclear weapons as just a bigger stick, a more powerful weapon, and nations want to be as strong as they can, and they view nuclear weapons as making them very strong. What they need to understand is that nuclear weapons may make a nation stronger. They don't make it more secure. In fact, nuclear weapons are the greatest threat to the security of all nations, including the nations that possess them. If a major nuclear power like the US or the UK or France or Russia or China used its nuclear weapons against an enemy in a successful strike, that use of nuclear weapons would almost certainly cause the destruction of the country that used them as well. Not through retaliation by the other side, but simply through the environmental destruction that the country's own weapons would cause. And that is not understood by decision makers who continue to view these as usable tools of statecraft rather than as the suicide bombs which they effectively are.
One approach to this is by getting the efforts of a professional body, in your case, doctors. What do you recommend people and other professional bodies perhaps to do to try and reduce the risk that a nuclear war could happen?
Well, I think we need to recreate the kind of mass movement that existed in the 1980s, where millions of people understood the danger posed by nuclear weapons and took political action about this. And the activity that people engaged in the 1980s had a tremendous impact. It changed the policies of the United States and the Soviet Union and ended the Cold War arms race. And we need to recreate that kind of movement today to have a similar impact on the nuclear policies of today's nuclear powers.
Already the world has banned chemical weapons, not with 100% success it seems, biological weapons. What about banning nuclear weapons? Can this be done by massive international political bodies?
Well, I think we can achieve a ban on nuclear weapons. And in fact, there are negotiations underway at the United Nations to bring about a new treaty that would ban the possession of nuclear weapons and their testing and their deployment. And that will not eliminate the weapons in and of itself, but it is an important next step towards the actual dismantlement and elimination of these weapons. It is a way of creating new pressure on the nuclear weapon states to get rid of their nuclear arsenals, and it's an enormously inspiring step forward that over 130 non-nuclear armed states have taken to finally say to the nuclear weapon states, you cannot continue to threaten our security and your own security in this terribly irresponsible way. You have to get rid of your nuclear weapons.